A sudden, ear-splitting explosion shattered the silence. Boom! Flames erupted from a building, slicing through the night like a wild beast unleashed. Thick black smoke curled into the sky, devouring everything in its path. The sharp scent of burning wood and melting plastic filled the air as terrified screams rang out. Panic took over. People ran, some shouting, some frozen in shock. A few grabbed their phones, dialing for help, but there was no time. The fire was spreading too fast, swallowing entire floors in seconds. Then, a scream. High above, through the dirty glass of a fourth-floor window, a woman pounded against the glass, her face contorted in terror. The fire was closing in, the heat licking at her back. She tried to push the window open, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. Down below, a crowd had gathered. They gasped, pointed, whispered, but no one stepped forward. No one dared. The flames were too fierce, the risk too high. And then, he appeared. From the shadows of a nearby alley, a man emerged. His clothes were ragged, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes sharp and calculating. A homeless man. Just another forgotten soul in the city. The kind people walked past every day without a second glance. But there was something different about him. While everyone else stood frozen in fear, he stepped forward, eyes locked on the burning building. No hesitation, no panic, just pure instinct. The crowd barely noticed him at first, but in the next few moments, they would realize. This man was no ordinary homeless stranger. No one knew his name. No one asked where he came from. He was just another face among the forgotten, a homeless man, drifting through life like a ghost. Every morning, he woke up in the same abandoned alleyway, tucking his worn-out blanket into a small backpack, his only possession. His days were a quiet struggle, searching for food, avoiding trouble, trying to stay warm in the cold and invisible in the crowd. People passed him on the streets without a second glance. To them, he was nothing more than background noise. But if anyone had bothered to look closer, if anyone had taken just one moment to study his sharp eyes, his steady hands, or the way he scanned his surroundings like a trained observer, they would have known he wasn't just another homeless man. He didn't beg. He didn't talk much. He didn't belong to any of the usual street groups. And unlike others, he never truly seemed lost. Because deep down, he wasn't. He had a past no one could have guessed. A past filled with roaring flames, blaring sirens, and life or death decisions. But no one knew that. To the world, he was just another forgotten man. Until tonight. Until the fire. Flames raged like a living beast, consuming everything in their path. The trapped woman's screams cut through the chaos, raw and desperate. She pounded against the window, choking on thick black smoke. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for a miracle. Down below, the crowd stood frozen. Some recorded the scene on their phones. Others muttered prayers under their breath. No one moved. And then, he did. The homeless man's sharp eyes locked onto the woman. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just action. In one swift motion, he sprinted toward the burning building. The heat was unbearable, waves of fire rolling out like a furnace. People shouted at him to stop. "You'll get yourself killed," someone cried. But he didn't stop. He moved with precision, his every step deliberate, not like a reckless man, but like someone who had done this before. He grabbed a discarded metal rod and slammed it against the locked door. Once, twice. The third time, it burst open. Thick smoke poured out, stinging his eyes, burning his lungs. He didn't flinch. He pulled his tattered scarf over his nose and charged inside. The world outside faded into muffled screams. Inside, the building was a death trap. flames creeping up the walls, the air suffocatingly hot. The woman's cries echoed from above. Time was running out. With practiced ease, he scanned the burning structure, calculating his path. The staircase was already engulfed in flames. No way up. His gaze darted to the side, a maintenance ladder leading to the second floor. He climbed it like a man who had done it 100 times before. Fast, fearless, precise. By the time he reached her floor, the fire was closing in. The walls groaned under the heat, threatening to collapse. There she was, curled in a corner, coughing violently, her tear-streaked face filled with terror. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice strong and commanding. "Look at me. We're getting out of here." The woman's eyes widened. He wasn't just some reckless man throwing himself into the flames. There was something in his voice, a confidence, an authority. He reached for her. She hesitated. "Trust me," he urged. And somehow, despite the madness around them, she did. He pulled her to her feet, shielding her with his body as they moved. But the flames were closing in too fast. There was only one way out. He glanced at the window, the very one she had been screaming from. Without a second thought, he grabbed a wooden chair and smashed it through the glass. The night air rushed in, but they were 4 stories up, too high to jump. The crowd gasped below. People screamed for the firefighters, but they were still minutes away. Minutes they didn't have. The man's mind raced. His breathing was steady. This wasn't panic. This was strategy. Because this wasn't the first time he had been in a burning building. And it wouldn't be the first time he had saved a life. Smoke filled her lungs. Every breath felt like fire. Every desperate gasp was met with suffocating heat. She had been on the 4th floor when the explosion shook the building. At first, she thought it was just a minor fire, something the alarms would handle. But within seconds, flames had erupted like a monster awakened from its sleep. She ran to the door, but the handle was scorching hot. She yanked her hand back with a gasp. The fire was outside, blocking her only exit. Panic set in. Her heart pounded. No way out. She ran to the window, banging against the glass with all her strength. "Help! Please, somebody!" Outside, she could see the growing crowd. People were pointing, staring, but no one was coming to save her. The flames inched closer, curling along the ceiling like fiery fingers. She was running out of time. Tears blurred her vision. Is this how it ends? She thought. Trapped, alone, forgotten. And then, a voice. "Hey!" Through the suffocating haze, a figure emerged from the smoke. At first, she thought she was hallucinating. A man. Dirty clothes, rugged face, homeless. Her hope wavered. Who is he? Can he even help me? But then he grabbed her arm. Strong grip, steady hands. His eyes weren't wild with panic like hers. They were focused, calculating, determined. "Look at me," he commanded. "We're getting out of here. Trust me." And somehow, despite the fire raging around them, despite the terror clawing at her chest, she did. The night air was thick with smoke, but the fire was finally out. The building was reduced to a charred skeleton, yet amidst the destruction, one story stood out. The story of a mysterious hero. The woman sat on the ambulance steps, a blanket draped around her shoulders, her hands still trembling. She had barely escaped death, but all she could think about was him. "Where is he?" she asked frantically, scanning the crowd. Then she saw him, standing off to the side, away from the cameras and flashing lights. His clothes were even more tattered than before, his face smudged with soot, but his expression remained unreadable. The firefighters approached him first. One of them studied him closely, his brow furrowing. There was something familiar about this man. "You knew what you were doing in there," the firefighter said slowly. That wasn't luck. That was training. The homeless man didn't respond right away. For a long moment, he just stood there, as if debating whether to speak. Then, finally, he exhaled and muttered, "I used to be one of you." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Reporters turned their cameras toward him. A former firefighter? Whispers spread. Who was he? Why was he living on the streets? How did a trained hero become a forgotten man? The woman, the one whose life he had just saved, stepped forward. She wasn't going to let him disappear again. "You saved my life," she said firmly, her voice filled with gratitude. "People need to know who you are." For the first time, he looked truly uncomfortable, as if he wasn't used to being seen. But it was too late now. The story hit the news. The headlines read, "Homeless man saves woman from burning building, revealed to be a former firefighter." Forgotten hero. How a once great firefighter disappeared into the streets, until one night brought him back. The community rallied. Donations poured in. People who once ignored him now wanted to shake his hand. But he wasn't looking for praise. One evening, as the woman found him again, she asked the question on everyone's mind. "Why did you leave? Why did you disappear?" He hesitated, looking out at the city lights. Then, in a quiet voice, he finally said, "Because sometimes saving others is easier than saving yourself." A long silence followed, but this time he wasn't going to walk away alone. Because now, the world finally knew his name. As the flames devoured the building, chaos ruled the streets. People screamed, sirens wailed in the distance, and yet, he remained calm. Too calm. The woman, still gasping for breath, clung to his arm as he led her through the thickening smoke. He didn't hesitate. He didn't fumble or panic like someone blindly running through an unfamiliar place. Instead, he moved with precision, turning left before even seeing the hallway, ducking under fallen beams without a second thought, kicking open a door like he knew it would be unlocked. It didn't make sense. Between frantic coughs, she choked out a question. How do you know where to go?" He didn't answer at first. His focus was razor sharp, his mind already 3 steps ahead. But then, as they reached the final stretch, the shattered window, the only way out, he finally spoke, his voice steady, despite the fire roaring behind him. "Because I've been here before." Her breath hitched. "What?" But there was no time for questions. The fire was closing in, and their only escape was through the broken window. He grabbed a rope. Where had that even come from? Secured it to a beam, and without waiting for hesitation, wrapped his arm around her and launched them both into the night air. The crowd gasped as they dangled 4 stories above the ground, swinging like a pendulum, before landing in a controlled crash onto a lower rooftop. By the time firefighters arrived, the woman was safe. The flames had won against the building, but not against them. And as she sat there, still trembling, her mind reeled over one undeniable fact. This man wasn't just lucky. He wasn't just brave. He knew exactly what he was doing. And that meant only one thing. He had a past that no one knew about. The city was still smoldering from the aftermath of the fire, but the mystery surrounding the homeless man, the hero who had saved a life, was just beginning to heat up. At first, no one questioned his story. The woman had spoken highly of him, calling him the man who saved her, and the media quickly dubbed him a local hero. But as days passed, questions began to stir. Why had he been living on the streets when he clearly had the skills and training of someone much more capable? How had he known the building's layout so well, without a single misstep in that deadly inferno? And most importantly, why did he seem so different from the average homeless man? The first clue came from the fire department. A fire investigator who had reviewed the footage of the fire's aftermath had noticed something odd. The man had moved with the kind of precision only someone with advanced knowledge of fire safety protocols would possess. He had acted quickly, expertly navigating the building like he was familiar with the structure's weaknesses. "There's something not right about this," the investigator muttered, pulling up old files on the building. How did he know where to go? He was quick to bring the matter up to his superior, who agreed to look deeper into it. Then came the whispers. It wasn't just the investigators who had questions. The people who had witnessed the rescue, from the crowd that had gathered outside to the firefighters who had arrived afterward, began to talk. "Did you notice the way he moved, like he'd been trained? I heard he wasn't just some random guy. I think I saw him around here before, but he was always alone. He knew exactly where the woman was. He didn't even hesitate to jump into the fire." Rumors spread like wildfire, and as they did, more people began to ask, who was he really? The media dug deeper, tracking down anyone who had seen the man before the fire. There were no records of him, no official reports, nothing. He was a ghost. But then, a breakthrough came. A police officer, who had been on the scene during the fire, remembered something strange. She recalled seeing the man's face. But it wasn't just the face of a homeless man. She had seen that face years ago, during a tragic building collapse, a fire at an old warehouse. Back then, he had been part of a rescue mission, a young firefighter known for his courage under pressure. But after the collapse, he vanished. No one knew what had happened to him. No one knew why he left. The officer didn't know if she was mistaken, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this man, this homeless hero, was someone she had once known, someone who had disappeared without a trace. The investigation was just beginning, and with each new clue, the mystery of his past grew deeper, pulling everyone closer to a truth that no one could have ever imagined. As the investigation into the mysterious hero deepened, the pieces of the puzzle began to come together. The whispers and rumors had reached a tipping point, and now it was clear. This was no ordinary homeless man. The police officer who recognized him was certain now. She tracked down old records, going through dusty files from years ago. Then, she found it. A missing firefighter from a tragedy that had been swept under the rug. His name was Ethan Cole. He had been one of the best in the fire department, brave, skilled, and a natural leader. But after a devastating fire at an old warehouse years ago, where several lives had been lost, Ethan had mysteriously disappeared. No one knew why. It wasn't until the officer dug deeper that the truth began to surface. The fire had been a nightmare, a perfect storm of negligence and chaos. Ethan had been one of the few to survive the disaster, but the trauma haunted him. The guilt weighed heavily on him. The failure to save everyone never left his mind. It broke him. The fire, the loss of life, the endless questions about what could have been done differently. It all became too much. In the aftermath, he quit the department, vanished from public view, and retreated into the shadows. No one knew where he went. For years, his name was just a distant memory, until now. The woman he had saved, the one whose life he risked everything to rescue, was the catalyst that unknowingly brought his past rushing back. She was the key to his redemption. When Ethan had seen the fire break out in the same building, he didn't hesitate. He recognized the structure. He had been there before. The layout, the weak points, the places most vulnerable to fire. He knew them all. His years as a firefighter had etched them into his memory. But it wasn't just knowledge that drove him. It was something deeper, something personal. He wasn't just rescuing a stranger, he was rescuing himself. Ethan had been living on the streets, not because he had to, but because he wanted to disappear. He had no interest in fame, no desire to return to the life he once had. The city had become a reminder of everything he had lost, and being invisible to the world was the only way to cope with the pain. But when the fire started, when he saw the woman trapped inside, something snapped inside him. The old instincts returned, the courage, the drive to act. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something right again. It wasn't just a rescue, it was his redemption. The news of Ethan's true identity hit the headlines like a storm. The homeless hero became the talk of the town, and the once forgotten firefighter was now the man everyone wanted to know. People who had once ignored him, turned their backs on him, now praised him for his bravery. But Ethan, he didn't want the spotlight. He didn't need the accolades. He had saved her, and that was enough. In the end, the truth about Ethan's past came to light, but only those who truly understood his pain could see the full picture. He wasn't just a man who had once been a firefighter. He was someone who had lost everything, yet had found a way to rise again, a hero in disguise. And though he would never return to his old life, in that moment, he had finally found the peace he had been searching for all along. Ethan Cole had chosen a life of solitude, a life where he could disappear into the shadows. To the world, he was just another forgotten face, a homeless man lost in the city's hustle. But behind that rough exterior, beneath the grime and the scars of time, lay a man who had sacrificed more than anyone could ever know. His decision to walk away from his past, to leave behind the life he had built as a firefighter, was a choice that cut deeper than any physical wound. It wasn't just about abandoning a career. It was about walking away from a part of himself, from the man he once was, from the life he had once cherished. The fire at the warehouse had shattered him. The explosion, the cries of victims, the faces of those he couldn't save, it haunted him every night. The guilt gnawed at him like a relentless beast. The weight of his failures crushed his spirit, and he could no longer look at himself in the mirror. To him, he wasn't a hero. He was a failure. So, he disappeared. He traded his fireproof suit for tattered clothes, his boots for worn shoes, and his badge for an invisible life. He chose the streets. The anonymity of being a nameless face in a crowded city was his only refuge. In his mind, it was the only place he could escape the judgment of his own conscience. But the reality of living on the streets wasn't kind. It was a life of struggle, of cold nights, empty stomachs, and the constant battle for survival. Ethan had been through every hardship imaginable: the harsh winters, the indifference of others, and the painful reminder that he was no longer the man he had been. But it was the mental battle that was the hardest. Every day, he fought to keep the past from swallowing him whole. He fought the overwhelming urge to crawl back to the firehouse, to seek redemption, to prove that he was still worthy. But the shame held him back. He couldn't bear the thought of facing those he had once worked with, those who had looked up to him. He felt like an imposter in his own skin. Yet, despite everything, Ethan's dedication to his former calling never truly disappeared. Deep inside, his heart still beat for those in need. His instincts, his training, remained sharp. He couldn't simply ignore the knowledge he had accumulated over the years, the skills that were embedded in his muscle memory. When the fire broke out in the building, it wasn't just the smoke that pulled him back. It was his deep-rooted sense of duty. He couldn't let another life be lost when he had the ability to save it. In that moment, The homeless man was no longer hiding from his past. He was stepping into the fire with the courage he had once known. He was giving everything he had, his body, his soul, his pain, to rescue someone in need. But the impact of that choice was far-reaching. It wasn't just about saving a life. It was about reclaiming his own. The rescue ignited something in Ethan, a flicker of hope, a spark of redemption. In saving the woman, he had saved a piece of himself. It wasn't perfect. The past would never be erased. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a failure. The sacrifices he had made, the life he had abandoned, the pain he had carried, were all part of the journey that led him back to this moment. The homeless man, the lost hero, had found a way to rise from the ashes. And as the city watched, as the world began to understand his story, one thing was clear. Ethan Cole's choice to save that woman wasn't just a heroic act. It was the moment he finally forgave himself. The struggles would continue. The pain wouldn't disappear. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan knew he wasn't alone anymore. And that knowledge, that peace, was the greatest sacrifice he had ever made. Ethan Cole's story wasn't just about a man in a firefighter's uniform. It wasn't about the heroic deeds carried out while wearing a badge or saving lives with the force of a firefighter's training. Ethan's story went far deeper than that. It redefined the very idea of heroism. For so many, heroism was something easily seen, a uniform, a title, an official role in society. Firefighters, police officers, soldiers, they were the faces that represented courage, sacrifice, and strength. Their actions were visible, their bravery celebrated. But what about those who didn't wear uniforms? What about the people who didn't have a title, who had no platform to showcase their deeds? Were they not heroes too? Ethan's life on the streets had taught him a crucial lesson. Heroism wasn't about wearing a uniform. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about choosing to act when others would turn away, when fear would paralyze most, and when it seemed easier to let the world burn. Living in the shadows, invisible to the world, he had seen humanity at its most vulnerable. He had watched people ignore the homeless, pretend they didn't exist. But he understood something others didn't. He understood that courage was in the quiet moments, when no one was looking. It was in the decision to help, when no one would ever thank you. It was in making a choice to do the right thing, even if it meant sacrificing everything. And when the fire broke out, when the building began to collapse around them, Ethan didn't hesitate. He didn't think about his past as a firefighter or the risk to his own life. He simply acted. The woman he saved, the witnesses, the people who would later call him a hero, they didn't see the full picture. They didn't know the depth of his struggle or the burden of the years he had spent living in silence. They saw the man who saved a life, and that was all they needed. But for Ethan, it was far more than just one rescue. It was the culmination of a lifetime of quiet courage. His courage wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve a spotlight or a medal. It was a quiet strength, a decision made in the face of overwhelming fear. It was knowing when to step forward, even when everything in his past was screaming for him to retreat. Ethan's story revealed that heroism wasn't defined by your job, your uniform, or your title. It wasn't about being celebrated. It wasn't about being seen by the world as a savior. True heroism was about what you did when no one was watching. It was about choosing others over yourself, even when the world had turned its back on you. In the end, Ethan's courage didn't just save a woman's life. It redefined what it meant to be a hero. Because sometimes, the strongest heroes are the ones who don't wear capes, don't have accolades, and don't seek recognition. Sometimes, they are the ones who've been broken and battered by life, yet still choose to rise and fight for others. And that, in its purest form, was the most powerful act of heroism Ethan Cole could ever have shown. Ethan Cole's story was a mirror, a reflection of the world we live in, one where people are often quick to judge based on what they see, without ever looking deeper. Before the fire, Ethan was just another face on the street. To most, he was invisible. The tattered clothes, the unkempt beard, the weariness in his eyes. He was the image of homelessness, of failure, of someone who had fallen through the cracks. In the eyes of the world, Ethan didn't fit the mold of what a hero should look like. His past had been erased, his face had faded from memory, and in the silence of his life on the streets, he had become a forgotten man. And yet, it was in the very place where people often turned away, on the streets, in the shadows, in the forgotten corners of society, that true heroism was born. It was in these very moments that Ethan proved a lesson that is too often overlooked. Never judge a person by their appearance. The moment he stepped into that burning building, the moment he risked his life to save a stranger, it was as if the world shifted. Suddenly, the homeless man was no longer just a symbol of neglect. He was a symbol of something far more powerful: compassion, bravery, and selflessness. Those who had once passed him by, those who had assumed he was just another lost soul with no purpose, were now confronted with the truth that heroism doesn't come in a particular package. It isn't shaped by wealth, status, or appearance. True strength lies within, the kind of strength that, when called upon, can make a difference in someone's life, no matter the circumstances. The woman Ethan saved was forever grateful, but she was also shaken by the realization of just how wrong her assumptions had been. She had never thought twice about the man living on the street, never considered his story, his pain, his past. She had seen him only as what he appeared to be, a homeless person. But now, she saw him as something far greater. Ethan's story forced her, and many others, to face the uncomfortable truth that we often overlook the humanity in those we deem unimportant. It's easy to dismiss someone when you don't understand their story. It's easy to assume that those who are struggling have nothing to offer. But in reality, everyone has a story. Everyone has a journey that has shaped them into who they are. And sometimes, it's the ones who have endured the greatest pain, the deepest struggles, who have the most to give. The ones who have been overlooked by society, who have been judged by their circumstances, are often the ones who can show the greatest compassion. Ethan didn't wear a uniform. He didn't carry a badge. But when he stepped into that building, when he saved a life, he showed us all that heroism can come from the most unexpected places. He challenged the world's perceptions of what it means to be a hero, and in doing so, he reminded us of the importance of compassion and understanding. In the end, Ethan's story was not just about fire or rescue. It was a lesson in humility, in compassion, and in the power of seeing beyond the surface. It reminded us that every person is more than the sum of their circumstances, that the most unlikely of heroes might be the very person we walk past every day, never knowing that their heart holds the power to change the world. Ethan Cole's lesson: never judge a book by its cover. The greatest heroes often come in the most unexpected forms. And compassion, true compassion, is something that can be found in the most surprising places, if only we're willing to look. Ethan Cole's actions weren't just about saving a life that day. They ignited a ripple of change that spread far beyond that burning building, awakening something in those who witnessed his selflessness. In a world where we often look for rewards, accolades, and recognition. Ethan's quiet act of courage reminded us that true service isn't about what you get, it's about what you give. For Ethan, the act of giving was ingrained in who he was. It wasn't about showing off or gaining anything in return. It was about stepping forward in the face of danger because someone needed him. It was about giving everything without a thought for himself. In those moments of chaos, he didn't hesitate to put his own life at risk. His first instinct was to help, because that's who he was, and it wasn't a one-time act of heroism. Ethan had spent his life giving, even before the fire. As a firefighter, he had given countless hours to saving others, to ensuring that people remained safe. But after the tragedy that forced him to leave that life, he chose to give in a different way, by embracing the suffering of others. By living on the streets, by facing his own pain and struggles, he became a beacon of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, one can still choose to give. His actions inspired those around him to reflect on the power of service. People who had passed him by, who had seen him only as a homeless man, began to question their own understanding of what it meant to truly serve others. How many times had they turned away from someone in need, assuming they had nothing to offer? How often had they looked at someone struggling and thought they couldn't possibly make a difference? Ethan's story showed them otherwise. In the days following the rescue, local organizations and community leaders spoke about the profound effect Ethan's actions had on their understanding of service. It wasn't about what you have, but what you can give to others. One act of courage, one decision to help without expecting anything in return, became a call to action for the entire community. People who had once been too busy, too focused on their own lives, were now inspired to find ways to give back, to volunteer, to assist those who were less fortunate, to serve in whatever capacity they could. Ethan's story was a powerful reminder that service doesn't need a platform. It doesn't need applause or recognition. True service comes from the heart, from the belief that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, can make a difference in someone else's life. Even those who have nothing to give can give everything. And it wasn't just about the big dramatic acts. Ethan's example showed people that service could be in the small, quiet moments too. The time you give to listen to someone's story, the act of reaching out to those in need, the decision to show kindness without expecting anything in return. It's the daily choice to serve others that truly matters. Ethan didn't see himself as a hero. He didn't want praise or recognition. For him, giving back wasn't a choice. It was a calling. And through his example, he reminded all of us that heroism isn't about grand gestures or public accolades. It's about the quiet, selfless acts that change lives, inspire others, and make the world a better place. The fire that day might have been terrifying, but it sparked something greater, a community's awakening to the power of giving back. Ethan Cole showed us that heroism isn't measured by what you get, it's measured by what you give. And in that, he was the greatest hero of all. Ethan Cole's story wasn't just a fleeting moment of heroism. It became a powerful reminder to everyone who heard it that heroes can exist in the most unlikely forms. The world has a tendency to box people into categories based on their appearance, background, or circumstances. We often look for heroism in uniformed figures, in individuals who are celebrated and well known. But Ethan's story shattered that illusion. For those who witnessed the fire, for those who heard about the homeless man who risked everything to save a stranger, something deep within them shifted. They realized that courage doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it wears ragged clothes, carries the weight of personal tragedy, and lives in the shadows, far from the public eye. Ethan had been living in the margins of society, overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten. And yet, when the moment called for it, he stepped forward and did what many wouldn't have been able to do. He saved a life. His act of bravery was a wake-up call for those who had dismissed people like him. Ethan's story forced people to rethink their assumptions about what makes a hero. It made them question why they had ever overlooked those who were struggling, why they had ignored the homeless, the broken, the silent individuals who walked through life without acknowledgement. The real question, Ethan's story made them realize, wasn't about whether they were heroes. It was about whether they had the courage to be heroes when it counted. In the months that followed, the impact of Ethan's actions was felt far beyond the city. His story spread like wildfire. People were inspired by the homeless man who chose to rise above his past, who chose to help others even when no one was looking. The idea that heroism could come from the most unexpected places became a topic of conversation, sparking a movement of understanding, compassion, and service. Ethan's choice to save the woman was more than just a brave act. It was a lesson in seeing beyond the surface. It was a reminder that every person, no matter how broken or lost they may seem, has the potential for greatness. No one is defined by their circumstances. Every person carries within them the possibility of becoming something extraordinary, if only given the chance to rise. For many, Ethan's story was a turning point, a reminder that true heroes don't need recognition to make an impact. They don't need a title or a uniform to define their worth. What makes a hero is their willingness to act when others would stand back, their ability to see the need and rise to meet it, no matter the cost. Ethan Cole, in his quiet and unassuming way, showed the world that heroes are often those who have suffered the most and still choose to give. The lasting impact of his story wasn't just in the lives he saved or the accolades he received. It was in the hearts he touched, the minds he changed, and the legacy he left behind. People began to look at their own lives and ask themselves, when the moment comes, will I step up? Will I rise above my fears and make a difference? In the end, Ethan's story wasn't about the fire or the building or even the rescue. It was about the enduring truth that heroes come in all shapes and forms. Some wear uniforms, some wear rags, some are celebrated, others are forgotten. But true heroism comes from the heart, from the courage to act when the world needs it most. And Ethan Cole, the homeless man, reminded us all of that in the most unforgettable way. Ethan Cole's story is not just a tale of bravery. It's a profound reminder of the power of human connection, the invisible thread that binds us all together, no matter our circumstances. It's a call to action, urging each of us to see beyond the surface, to recognize the struggles others may be facing, and to act with compassion and understanding when we can. When Ethan ran into that burning building, he didn't hesitate to put his own life on the line to help a stranger. His actions spoke volumes about the strength of human empathy. It wasn't about his past, his status, or even his appearance. It was about seeing someone in need and stepping up. In a world where we often rush past one another, Ethan's story challenges us to slow down, to notice the pain in others, and to offer a hand when it's needed the most. How many times have we walked by someone who seemed different, someone who appeared to be struggling, and simply turned away? How often have we assumed someone's worth based solely on their circumstances? But what Ethan showed us is that we never truly know the full story of another person. We never know the silent battles they face, the strength they possess, or the kindness they're capable of offering. Everyone has a story. Everyone deserves compassion. Ethan's rescue wasn't just an act of saving one life. It was a symbol of what happens when we look beyond ourselves and see the potential for goodness in others. It was a moment of connection that transcended the chaos of the fire and reminded everyone watching that we all have the ability to help each other. This is where the call to action lies. Seek the good in others. It's easy to dismiss people based on first impressions, to assume someone has nothing to offer because of how they appear or where they come from. But we must ask ourselves, what if we are missing the very person who could change everything for us or for someone else? What if the person we've overlooked is the one who needs a helping hand, or the one who will be there when we need them the most? Offer help when needed. It doesn't take grand gestures or grandiose acts of heroism to make a difference. Sometimes it's as simple as listening, offering a smile, or showing someone they matter. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can ignite a transformation in someone's life, just as Ethan's one decision changed the trajectory of so many lives that day. Ethan's story reminds us that human connection is the foundation of everything that is good in this world. It's the fuel behind compassion, courage, and service. And if we want to create a better world, we need to be willing to connect, not just with the people we know, but with the strangers we pass on the street, the ones who may be suffering quietly, the ones who might just need someone to see them. Let Ethan's actions be a catalyst, a challenge for us all to look deeper, act with kindness, and remember that heroes are made when we choose to help one another. We all have the power to make a difference, just as Ethan did. It's time we rise to the challenge and be the change we want to see in the world. Because in the end, we're all connected, and it's our shared humanity that has the power to change everything. In every corner of the world, there are unsung heroes, those whose actions ripple through lives, touching hearts, changing fates, and creating waves of impact, all without ever asking for recognition or reward. Ethan Cole's story is a tribute to these quiet warriors, those who step up when the world is in need, not because they seek fame or glory, but because they are compelled by something far greater, the need to help others. Ethan didn't wear a uniform, and he didn't have a badge. He wasn't celebrated on the news or lauded by society for his bravery. He didn't save lives for accolades. He didn't risk everything for the chance to be a hero. He did it because that's who he was. His decision to run into a burning building, to risk his own life to save a woman he'd never met, wasn't made for the cameras or for praise. It was made because he saw someone in danger and knew he had to act. That is the essence of an unsung hero. These are the individuals who perform acts of kindness, courage, and selflessness every day, often unnoticed, unthanked, and unseen by those around them. They help without hesitation, love without bounds, and give without expecting anything in return. They embody the true spirit of heroism, not in their desire for recognition, but in their willingness to serve others when the need arises. Ethan's story isn't just about one man. It's a celebration of all those who go unnoticed, who give their time, energy, and heart to others without ever expecting a thank you. It's about the firefighter who works long hours, the teacher who stays after class to help a student, the neighbor who quietly lends a hand when no one is looking. It's about the countless invisible threads of kindness and compassion that weave through our communities, held together by unsung heroes who believe in making the world a better place, even if they never get credit for it. The true power of their actions is not found in the recognition they receive, but in the lives they touch, the hearts they lift, and the impact they leave behind. Heroes aren't always the ones who wear the spotlight. They are the ones who quietly, humbly make a difference, one life at a time. And it's these unsung heroes who remind us that real heroism doesn't come with fame. It comes with the willingness to act, to serve, and to give. Ethan's courage was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of countless others who serve every day in silence. It is these people, like Ethan, who show us the true power of human kindness and the strength of the human spirit. They teach us that heroism isn't just about big moments in the spotlight. Sometimes, heroism is in the quiet, unnoticed acts that make a difference when no one is watching. So let's celebrate those unsung heroes in our lives, the ones who offer help without hesitation, who spread kindness without seeking anything in return, who give and give without ever expecting to be acknowledged. They are the heartbeats of our communities, the silent warriors who make the world a better place, one selfless act at a time. To the unsung heroes, thank you. Your work may go unseen, but your impact is felt by all of us. You are the true champions, and we see you.